sports commentator Stephen A. Smith is facing backlash after his interview with Candace Owens. Now, someone sent this clip to me and they wanted to get my opinion on it. And so there are a number of things that I saw that I do think give me reason to pause. And for those of you who know, who watch the show, I am not opposed to people interviewing people or talking to people that they disagree with. There have been a number of times that I've brought guests onto this show that I do not agree with. That is not the issue at here. And this isn't really so much about Candace, because we all know where Candace Owens stands on the issues and the positions that she has. But what this is about is the need to push back. And one of the things I did notice during this interview, during one specific topic where I know Stephen A. Smith goes hard in the paint against, he chose not to say anything. Let's go ahead and get into the clip here, ladies and gentlemen. This is Stephen A. Smith discussion with Candace Owens. Listen to this particular part right here.
And I get it. And I guess for me, because I think about it, and I remember when you showed up, I believe it was in Paris, you were with Kanye West and you were wearing the White Lives Matter shirt and what have you. And I said, damn. And I was upset. I was actually upset at you. And here's why, Candace, because I looked at it and I said, no, don't give the ammunition. Don't give the ammunition. You can sit up there and you can talk to folks about your views, what you know, and educate folks without them being closed-minded because they saw something and visualized something and automatically deemed that you were against us as a people.
Right.
So, I mean, as you reflect on a moment like that and you talk about the black community and politics, how do you feel? How do you gauge what's the right thing to do and what's not the right thing to do?
Okay, so let's go ahead and pause right here for just a second, because the reality is we all know, if you have a brain, we all know that that was to get attention. We all know that that stunt that Kanye West and Candace Owens did with the White Lives Matter t-shirt, that was to get attention. Now, yes, like that's Kanye's like brand or whatever, but he also likes to get attention. Like this isn't like, I don't understand why Stephen A. Smith feels he has to try to figure this out. That's very obvious. And I do feel like even with that particular discussion, that Stephen A. Smith was not going as hard in the paint as he has before when she was not in an interview with him, right? So one of the things that I have noticed is that Stephen A. Smith, I have watched him for years, okay? So before people say, oh, well, Sabs, you're going too hard on Stephen A. Smith, give him a chance, yada, yada. I have watched Stephen A. Smith as a commentator for years. I watched him as a sports commentator. So he was not new to me. That's what people have to understand. So I watched him on ESPN, on First Take for years, because yes, I don't just watch politics. I'm also heavily into sports. So I knew who Stephen A. Smith was. He is known for like showing his passion, his emotion in his commentary. He is kind of known for sometimes being loud or whatever, but everybody knows that Stephen A. Smith is going to tell you exactly how he feels, and he's not going to shy away from something that he feels as though may give him some crap, right? Like at least in the sports commentary in particular, he is known for being that way, assertive in his commentary, aggressive in his commentary, even during some of the sports interviews that I've watched him give as well. When he steps over into the political arena, I have noticed a difference. When he is interviewing politicians or he's interviewing podcasters, talking about such said topics that he has discussed before, he doesn't seem to have as much passion or drive against talking about those topics when he's interviewing people. And I don't expect him to yell at his guests. But what you do expect is some type of pushback. He is known for doing that in the sports arena. So when he came over to the political space, all of a sudden it's like he interviews Hakeem Jeffries. No, hardly no pushback, right? Like these types of things. He sits down with Bill Maher. Bill Maher makes these Zionist comments. Hardly no pushback. So it's very clear that Stephen A. Smith wants to make sure that he can stay within that club. That's the point that I want to drive home with this, guys, because I've been trying to tell you guys this for quite some time. You're starting to notice more and more people from the corporate media realm who have made their way over to YouTube And some would say maybe they're infiltrating the independent media space, but they made their way over to YouTube. And it's like they are bringing the status quo media talking points with them. They're not changing because they're on YouTube. They're still, it's like they are taking a status quo position and they are now putting that into what we would call the independent media space. So that's part of the conversation, but wait till we get to the part about George Floyd and Derek Chauvin. That's where it's really telling. Listen to this.
You know, for me, the discussion and polite discussion, it doesn't work. I have found that. You can go back and watch me on stage with T.I. and Killer Mike, and it doesn't work with the Black community. And I have a theory on this, and I think partially it's because we have this instance of father absence, but there's a lot of attitudes. Mm-hmm. And if you try to come politely, you're just going to get disrespected. And so in terms of the White Lives Matter shirt, first off, Kanye, that's how he communicates. He communicates with art. That's like, this was Kanye's thing that I was stepping into, but I understood what he was saying there because he is someone that does not like, no one puts Kanye in the corner. No one tells Kanye what he has to be. And so when you start saying, oh, I'm going to superimpose you just being a Black victim onto someone like Kanye West, and you know, he hated when white people would come up to him and say Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. So he's like, okay, you want to patronize me? Oh, let me patronize you. Your life matters too, right? Like, okay. Oh yeah, like white lives matter too. Mm-hmm. And I want you to know that white lives matter. Your life matters. He never liked that, the patronization of it. And mm-hmm. So I felt the same way. And we communicate differently. I usually am using more bombastic words, but that moment to me, especially as someone who grew up and really Kanye's music kind of gave me the courage to be myself, mm-hmm. to not have to be an archetype of what a Black woman should be. It was a moment for me that I reflect on very fondly. And yeah, it broke the internet and it started a lot of conversations. But imagine if Black people were just like, yeah, every time I saw a white person, right, I'm with you. Your white life matters. It's just, there's something about it I just don't like.
Okay, so this part right here, even here, Stephen A. Smith could have pushed back in this instance, right? And you're going to see this in another clip that I'm going to show you where he does just that, right? Why doesn't Stephen A. Smith at this particular point, where Candace is talking about white lives matter, et cetera, why doesn't Stephen A. Smith bring up anything else about the other side of the equation? Right? He's just nodding and just like, like agreeing with her. Why doesn't he bring up the other side of the equation? Because here's the thing. As much as Candace Owens has gone after BLM, and there's BLM, that's the grassroots organization, and then there's BLM, which is the corporation. There are two different groups, right? But this attack on BLM, on Black Lives Matter and all this kind of stuff, why doesn't Stephen A. Smith at this particular point ask, where is that same type of energy for the other side of the coin? Where is that same type of energy against neo-Nazis in this country, against KKK members in this country? Yes, the Klan still does exist for those who are not aware. Where is that same type of energy against those particular groups who say white lives matter and Black lives don't? Why doesn't Stephen A. Smith bring that up? And I ask this question because Stephen A. Smith has been very vocal about how he feels about race in this country. He has talked about this on ESPN, believe it or not just on his podcast. I've seen him have these conversations about police brutality, about racism in this country on ESPN. So he has Candace Owens sitting right in front of him defending the White Lives Matter t-shirt. Why doesn't Stephen A. Smith push back at this particular point and say, Candace, why don't you have that same type of energy towards white supremacists in this country when they point their finger at Black people and they say, no, your life does not matter? Where's that same type of energy? Because you see, one group is in a position of power, the other one is not. This is what people really need to break down. And Stephen A. Smith, I know he knows this. He knows it. So why doesn't he say it? There's no pushback. There's no pushback. It gets crazier. Watch this.
You brought up the use of bombastic words. You used that with George Floyd as well, who was murdered by a police officer in Minnesota. And obviously a lot of people in the Black community had a real problem with you as it pertained to that.
Pause. Notice who brings up this topic. This is the one that I think a lot of people are upset with Stephen A. Smith about. If you look at some of the comments on this video, this is something that people bring up. People are asking like, yo, what happened here? Stephen A. Smith brings up George Floyd and Derek Chauvin. Candace didn't bring it up. So since you're the one who brought it up, you would expect that he would push back. But that's not what happens. I know exactly how Stephen A. feels about this issue. I remember him talking about this on ESPN. I remember watching Stephen A. Smith talk about his own experience with the police on ESPN, about how he was stopped by a police officer when he was driving. The police officer approached the driver's side of the car, asked for his driver's license registration. Stephen A. Smith wanted to know why he was stopped. And he said the officer put his hand on his gun. It wasn't until another officer who was with them said, whoa, do you know who that is? That's Stephen A. Smith from ESPN. Then the officers let him go. So Stephen A. Smith even has an advantage that the average black man does not have. And that's the fact that he's pretty well-known celebrity. So think about that for a second. Pretty well-known celebrity, at least in the sports community. He has talked about his own experiences with the police. He has spoken out against police brutality. In this very moment where he brings this up with Candace Owens, watch what happens here.
That brings me to this question. When you take these positions, does it enter your mind? I don't want to use the word vitriol because I think that's a bit too strong and that's unfair to you, and I don't want to do that. But when you consider the fact that so many people in the black community have voted Democratic since the civil rights legislation in 1964. We remember what Lyndon B. Johnson said, that, you know, you pass this legislation and we'll have the Negroes vote for us for the next 200 years. Remember that statement? I know, I remember that statement. I'm wondering, because of your knowledge of politics, your obvious knowledge of the issues, when you speak on these things and you take positions about, you take such positions, particularly if it's antithetical or the antithesis of what the black community will point to, do you think about it and do so on purpose because, dare I say, you're disgusted with us as a community for being hoodwinked by the Democratic Party in your eyes? Is that possible?
Notice the way that Stephen A. Smith just framed this, right? Stephen A. Smith had Candace Owens right in front of him. He brings up George Floyd and Derek Chauvin. He doesn't ask Candace why she has the position that she does about Derek Chauvin. He doesn't ask her about the George Floyd documentary that she created, etc. He doesn't ask about any of those things. And that's important when you see the response that he gave to Ben Shapiro, when Ben Shapiro says we need to pardon Derek Chauvin. And I've said this over and over and again, regardless of what you feel about that situation, whether you think that George Floyd died from a drug overdose, I don't. Whether you think that Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd or not, whatever you think about that position, the Minneapolis Police Department made it very clear during the trial that he did not follow protocol and that what he did was wrong. And that's the point that people need to drive home. Stephen A. Smith, look at the way he frames it. He puts it back on the black community. Why? Is this your way? Are you upset with the black community and the way that we choose to handle these situations? Why didn't he ask her about her position about Derek Chauvin? Why didn't he ask her about her position about police brutality? No, he puts it back on the black community. Let's continue.
So that's a very good question. And disgusted would not be the right term for it. Frustrated, yes, and constantly trying to give people the facts so that they understand that Lyndon Baines Johnson was an avowed racist and he hated us, and yet we are doing everything that he wanted us to do. We are reacting emotionally and not rationally. We seem to be a stereotype of irrationality, actually. All we have to do is make them feel something and they won't react. And I want to be clear, it's not just black.
Pause. Yes, LBJ was a racist. I've talked about this as well, as much as white Democrats don't want to believe this. LBJ was a racist. There were also racist Republicans too. Notice who she singles out. Notice it's just, and I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican. So if you're new, don't come for me with that. I vote third party, so don't even come for me with that. But the reality is that there are racist Democrats, there are racist Republicans. Why does she only mention the racist Democrat politician? Again, Stephen A. Smith, not gonna ask these questions that I'm asking, right? Obviously, this is done for a reason. This is done for a reason. Because racism comes in different political ideologies, boo. It doesn't matter what political party you belong to. You can still be racist. But Candace goes with that because that is what helps her brand. People have to understand this. I have said this before. I applaud her support of the Palestinian people in Gaza. I agree with her on that. I applaud her being against the Ukraine war. I applaud on that. But when it comes to certain positions that Candace has had, particularly within the Black community, no, I don't applaud those positions because I know what this is. I know that if you are a Black conservative, yes, there's a lot of money to be made for that. It also doesn't help that Candace Owens said so herself on her Twitter account after she was fired from the Daily Wire, that not only was she was allowed to speak poorly about the Black community, but she also tweeted that it was encouraged by the Daily Wire for her to do so. Why doesn't Stephen A. Smith bring this up? And I understand. Look, I've done multiple interviews I've interviewed a lot of people on this show, and I know you don't always have time to ask everything. But as someone like Stephen A. Smith, who has been so very critical about racism in this country and about police brutality, you have someone that you are interviewing right now who has the exact opposite belief as you, and you didn't push back. You didn't challenge her on it. Mark Lamont Hill interviewed Candace Owens and he pushed back. Do you see what I mean? Like, there's a difference. So if you're just going to have people in the room so you can like be buddy with them and let me get bonus points over here, etc., and you're not going to push back on these critical topics where you know that you disagree, you fundamentally disagree, and you've spoken out about it before, that is a problem. And that's why people are calling him out about this. I'll let her finish, and then we'll get to his comment to Ben Shapiro.
Americans, the Me Too movement was another manifestation of that. That's why I'm doing this Harvey Weinstein series. But what really does upset me about the Black community is that the manner in which we defend criminals, you will not find this in any other community. Okay. So white person gets shot, killed, unarmed. They're not coming out. White people are not coming out and burning down their own neighborhoods. Right. They're going to be
Did you see the Black community attack me for going off about OJ being celebrated? Did you see that?
Yeah. Yeah, they've conditioned us to actually defend the worst in our communities. They just will let it go. You think Chinese people are going to run outside if they're like, well, listen, this guy was high on fentanyl. He got into a brush up with police officers and he died. Chinese people will be like, especially Asian moms are just dead serious. They'd be like, you idiot, good for you. So you're an embarrassment. Never come.
He's agreeing with her. He's nodding and agreeing with her, right? Now, she brought up the fentanyl issue. That is especially important because of what he says here. And no, he doesn't push back on her there. He made a video about Ben Shapiro after that interview, and I want to show you the difference. It's not up in Sabby's head here. Let me show you the difference. Because some of the things that he's going to criticize Ben Shapiro for also apply to Candace Owens, but he doesn't bring it up. Let's get into this part right here. Notice she mentioned the fentanyl. That is important. This was his response to Ben Shapiro about pardoning Derek Chauvin.
Elon Musk, what the hell do you mean there's something to think about? Ben Shapiro, of all the people in the world that you could have asked for a pardon for, of all the people in the world, Ben Shapiro, Derek Chauvin's the guy. A white police officer who cuffed George Floyd, took his knee, put it on his neck, kept it there for over 9 minutes as George Floyd was crying and whimpering for his mama, as people were taking photos and video as he was telling you he couldn't breathe, and you still kept your knee on his neck for over 9 minutes. And of all the people, Ben Shapiro, that you could have come up with to say he should receive a pardon, that's the person that came to your mind.
Why didn't he say this to Candace Owens? That whole statement that he gave there about what Derek Chauvin did when he brought up George Floyd and Derek Chauvin to Candace Owens, and she mentions fentanyl. Why didn't he say this to Candace Owens? Is Stephen A. for real? Like, what is Stephen A. doing? People need to start asking this question. What exactly is Stephen A. Smith trying to do? Where was all this same energy? Again, not saying you have to yell at guests. I don't yell at guests, but why didn't he bring this up to her when he brought up George Floyd? Let's continue. Another part here.
Why? I'll ask you another question, Ben Shapiro. You know, you brought up, drug use. You brought up a criminal record, if I remember correctly. I think that's what you said, right? Right, Ben Shapiro?
Isn't that the same thing Candace Owens said? Let's go back just a little bit. Just a little bit, because I'm trying to prove a point.
Remember correctly, I think that's what you said, right, Ben Shapiro? Just a simple question. Up, drug use. You brought up a criminal record, if I remember correctly. I think that's what you said, right, Ben Shapiro?
Okay, he said Ben Shapiro brought up drug use. He brought up a criminal record. True. So did Candace. And Candace brought that up right to your face. So why didn't you push back? If people don't see the game that's being played, I don't know what to tell you guys. Like, this is absolutely ridiculous, right? All this heat for Ben Shapiro saying the same things that Candace Owens said to your face. And nothing, no comment. Listen to this part.
Just a simple question. Respectfully, sir. Would you have taken that position if George Floyd was a Jewish person? A white Jewish person?
Okay, so he could have asked the same question to Candace Owens. Maybe not the Jewish part, because we know how Candace feels about that. But he could have said, would you have taken that position if it was a white person? This is why people are clowning him right now. This is why people are not happy with the interview. Now, there are some that are upset that he even spoke to her at all. I'm not one of those people. I think people should be able to speak to people that they disagree with. But it's also very important to me that when you do have those conversations, that you do push back on the areas where you disagree. Otherwise, people will just assume that you are having this conversation and you're giving them a softball interview because you want to be buddies with them. You want to be in their club. There have been a number of people that have reached out to me and have asked me to interview Candace Owens. And I've told you multiple times, number one, I don't have contact information for info for Candace Owens. Number two, it would not be that type of interview, because I would press her on those issues. It would not be that type of interview. I don't know if people are thinking this will be some kumbaya moment. No, we agree on two things. We agree on Gaza. We agree on the Ukraine, ending the Ukraine war. But fundamentally, there are a lot of areas where we definitely disagree. And I, for one, would never, ever sit up there and say, the Daily Wire came to me, and people have come to me. If Daily Wire had come to me and said, oh, we would love for you to da-da-da-da, and oh, by the way, we encourage you to go after the Black community. No. And there are other people that they approached before Candace Owens, by the way. There were other Black women that were approached before Candace Owens that were asked to do just the same thing that Candace was doing. Some people don't know about that. But that's why people are upset with Stephen A. Now, Stephen A. did respond because he's getting the pushback. Listen to this.
Everybody has their feelings. We have a right to disagree. And again, When we have a lengthier discussion, I will most certainly be a bit more probing and challenging. This wasn't the time for that.
That's an excuse. As a commentator and interviewer, you guys, that's an excuse. No, this wasn't the time for that. Stephen A. Smith brought up George Floyd, not Candace Owens. He brought it up. So within the time that you had with her, yes, you still could have pushed back the way that I did. You still could have pushed back. There's no excuse. It's not that this wasn't the time for that. You were trying to get in goody, get on the good side and trying to put yourself within that space, try to be buddy. And honestly, maybe there could have been some nervousness there. I don't know. But the reality is, when you do have these conversations with people that you disagree with, it is important that you do push back on the areas where you disagree. You didn't do that. You sat there and you nodded and you agreed because you were probably just happy just to get the interview. I don't know, but that's not the way this works. This is exactly what I was talking about corporate media making its way onto YouTube and still doing corporate media things, not challenging people. And it takes practice. It does take practice. I'll be the first to tell you, I've done a lot of interviews. It takes practice, but Stephen A. Smith is not new to doing interviews. So that same energy that he had for Ben Shapiro, who has the same criticism that Candace Owens does about Derek Chauvin, you should have pushed back on Candace about that, and you did not. And that's why people are upset. I don't know what to tell you guys other than this. It is very clear what some people are trying to do. And it's very clear to me that some people are just trying to get as many big names as possible, and so that they can continue to grow and get their name out there, et cetera. And he's well known in the sports community, but now people are starting to know him more in the political community. But the reality is, where sports commentary differs, when you come into the political space, people have a lot more heat for you. I know from experience, people are going to challenge you more. People are going to ridicule you more. And if Stephen A. Smith, if you can't take that, then this is not the space for you. Stephen A. Smith just mentioned that he was thinking about running for president. What are you going to do differently than the other presidential candidates and other presidents that we've had in the past? And you can't even push back on Candace Owens about George Floyd. Something I know that you have a very different position about, and you've had a very different position about for years, and you don't challenge it. That's why people are coming after Stephen A. That's why people are criticizing the interview. It's less so about that you interviewed her. It's more so about you did not push back. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.